Case 1. Ana Maria Cardona, the baby Lollipops, horror. Our first case takes us back to November 1990, to Miami-Dade County, where a discovery so horrific was made that it would haunt investigators for decades. A fisherman was out near a desolate stretch of water, doing what he'd done countless times before. But on this particular day, something caught his eye, something that didn't belong. Floating in the water was a small container, specifically, a Igloo brand dog food cooler. What he found inside that cooler would become one of the most disturbing discoveries in Florida criminal history. Inside was the badly decomposed body of a small child. A little boy. He'd been crammed into this container like trash, discarded and forgotten. The child was so decomposed that immediate identification was impossible. He wore only a small shirt with the word Lollipops printed on it. In death, this innocent child had no name, no identity, no one to claim him. Investigators began calling him Baby Lollipops, a heartbreaking nickname that would stick for years. For 3 long years, this little boy remained unidentified. Investigators worked tirelessly, following every possible lead, but the trail remained cold. Who was this child? Where did he come from? And most importantly, who could do something so monstrous to an innocent toddler? The break came in 1993 through advances in forensic technology and relentless detective work. The child was finally identified as Lázaro Figueroa, a 3-year-old boy who should have been playing with toys, learning to talk in full sentences, experiencing the wonder of childhood. Instead, his short life had been filled with unimaginable suffering. The investigation led directly to his mother, Ana Maria Cardona, and her boyfriend, Olivia Gonzalez. What they uncovered was a pattern of systematic abuse that had escalated to murder. Little Lázaro had been subjected to horrific physical abuse in the months leading up to his death. Court documents and testimony revealed that this toddler had been beaten, burned, and tortured by the 2 people who should have protected him. The medical examiner's findings were devastating. Lázaro had suffered multiple injuries over an extended period. The abuse wasn't a single incident. It was ongoing, relentless torture of a helpless child. The little boy had endured pain that no human being, let alone a 3-year-old, should ever experience. On the day of his death, the abuse reached its fatal conclusion. After killing the child, Cardona and Gonzalez made the calculated decision to dispose of his body. They stuffed his small frame into that dog food cooler and threw him away like garbage into the water, hoping he'd never be found, never be identified, never bring consequences to their door. But justice, though delayed, was coming. The legal proceedings revealed the full scope of the horror. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence of the systematic abuse. Medical experts testified about the injuries Lázaro had sustained. The jury heard how this mother and her boyfriend had turned a home into a torture chamber for an innocent child. Ana Maria Cardona was convicted of first-degree murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming and undeniable. In 1999, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her boyfriend, Olivia Gonzalez, received the same sentence. Today, more than 3 decades after little Lázaro's body was discovered floating in that cooler, Ana Maria Cardona remains behind bars. She spent more years in prison than Lázaro spent on this earth. She'll never walk free. She'll never feel sunshine on her face as a free woman. She'll never know anything but concrete walls and iron bars for the rest of her natural life. But the question that haunts everyone who learns about this case remains: how could a mother do this to her own child? What darkness exists in the human heart that allows someone to torture and kill the child they brought into this world? Little Lázaro Figueroa deserved so much more than the 3 short years he got. He deserved love, protection, happiness, and a future. Instead, he got pain, suffering, and a watery grave. But at least, in the end, he got his name back. He's no longer Baby Lollipops. He's Lázaro, a child whose memory demands that we never forget, and that we never stop fighting for children who cannot fight for themselves. If this case affected you and you want to see more investigations that give victims their voices back, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Cold Case Time. A lot of viewers haven't subscribed yet, and your support means everything. Case 2. Amanda E. Lewis, the drowning of Adrianna Hutto. Our second case takes us to Esto, Florida, a small town in the Panhandle where everyone knows everyone. and tragedy hit particularly hard in August 2007. 7-year-old Adrianna Hutto was a bright, energetic child with her whole life ahead of her. She lived with her mother, Amanda Lewis, and her younger brother, AJ, who was just 6 years old at the time. By all outward appearances, they seemed like a normal family. But behind closed doors, something sinister was brewing. On August 8, 2007, emergency services received a frantic call from Amanda Lewis. She reported that her daughter, Adrianna, had drowned in the family's swimming pool. When first responders arrived, they found the 7-year-old girl unresponsive. Despite desperate attempts to revive her, Adrianna was pronounced dead. Initially, it appeared to be a tragic accident, a moment of inattention that resulted in a devastating loss. Drowning is one of the leading causes of death for children, and pool accidents, while heartbreaking, do happen. But something didn't sit right with investigators. The first red flag was Amanda Lewis's behavior. Her emotional responses seemed off, rehearsed even. Experienced detectives know that grief manifests differently in different people, but there were inconsistencies in her story that couldn't be ignored. The timeline didn't quite add up. The physical evidence at the scene raised questions. Then came the bombshell that would crack the case wide open. Adrianna's 6-year-old brother, AJ, witnessed what really happened that day. What this little boy revealed to investigators was chilling. According to AJ's testimony, he saw his mother hold Adrianna underwater in the pool. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of inattention. This was deliberate. This was murder. A 6-year-old child watched his mother drown his sister. The investigation intensified immediately. Forensic experts examined every detail of the scene. Medical examiners looked for evidence that would corroborate or contradict AJ's account. Child psychologists carefully interviewed the young boy, using specialized techniques designed to get truthful testimony from children without leading them or causing additional trauma. AJ's testimony remained consistent. He knew what he saw. His mother had killed his sister. But the prosecution faced a significant challenge. Could a jury convict a mother of murdering her child based primarily on the testimony of a 6-year-old? Defense attorneys would surely attack the credibility of such a young witness. Children can be confused, can misremember, can be influenced. Building a case that would hold up in court required more than just AJ's testimony. Investigators dug deeper into Amanda Lewis's background and the family dynamics. They discovered a troubling pattern. There were indications of mental health issues, but nothing that would excuse or explain the deliberate murder of a child. Friends and family members were interviewed. Some painted a picture of a struggling mother, but struggle doesn't equal murder. The physical evidence, combined with AJ's testimony, began to paint a clear picture. The autopsy findings were consistent with forced drowning, not accidental drowning. The positioning of the body, the lack of defensive injuries one might expect if a child was struggling to save herself from accidentally going under, all of it supported the prosecution's theory. Amanda Lewis was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial was emotionally devastating for everyone involved. The courtroom had to hear the details of how a mother held her 7-year-old daughter underwater until she stopped breathing. They had to listen to a 6-year-old boy describe watching his sister die at his mother's hands. The defense attempted to poke holes in the prosecution's case, suggesting that AJ was confused, that the death was accidental, that Amanda was a loving mother who would never harm her children. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated and returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Amanda Lewis was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in delivering the sentence, noted the particularly heinous nature of the crime. The betrayal of trust between mother and child, the premeditated nature of the act, and the trauma inflicted on the surviving child who witnessed it all. Today, Amanda Lewis sits in a Florida prison, where she'll remain for the rest of her life. She'll never again feel the freedom she took from Adrianna. She'll never celebrate another birthday outside prison walls. She'll never know anything but the consequences of her actions. As for young AJ, one can only hope he's received the therapy and support necessary to process the trauma of what he witnessed. He lost his sister that day, but he also lost his mother, not to death, but to her own evil actions. He had to testify against the woman who gave him life, telling the truth even when that truth was unbearably painful. Adrianna Hutto was only 7 years old. She should be in her mid-20s now, Perhaps finishing college, starting a career, falling in love, living the life every child deserves. Instead, her life was cut short by the one person who should have protected her above all else. This case reminds us that monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes they tuck you into bed at night. Sometimes they look like the people we trust most. If you're moved by Adrianna's story and want to continue seeing cases where justice prevails, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Your support helps us continue this important work. Case 3. Shauna D. Taylor, the Munchausen by proxy poisoner. Our third case introduces us to one of the most insidious forms of child abuse, Munchausen by proxy syndrome, where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care, typically to gain attention and sympathy. Shauna D. Taylor, a mother from Claremont, Florida, appeared to be living every parent's nightmare. Her young daughter seemed to be constantly ill, suffering from mysterious symptoms that baffled doctors. Hospital visits became routine. The little girl underwent numerous medical procedures, tests, and treatments. Taylor presented herself as a devoted mother, tirelessly caring for her sick child, advocating for answers, desperately seeking a cure for her daughter's ailments. Medical professionals worked diligently to diagnose and treat the child, sympathizing with the mother who seemed so caring and concerned. Nurses and doctors watched as Taylor sat by her daughter's bedside, appearing to be the picture of maternal devotion. But something wasn't adding up. The case began to unravel in 2013 when medical professionals at Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children in Orlando started noticing peculiarities. The child's symptoms didn't follow normal patterns. Test results were inconsistent with natural disease processes. The timing of the child's medical crises seemed to correlate with the mother's presence. Experienced pediatricians and nurses began to suspect something darker was at play. They'd seen Munchausen by proxy before, a rare but devastating form of abuse where the caregiver makes the child sick to feed their own psychological need for attention and sympathy. The hospital implemented covert surveillance and careful monitoring. What they discovered was horrifying. Shauna Taylor was poisoning her own daughter. Medical tests revealed elevated levels of substances that shouldn't have been in the child's system. Further investigation showed that Taylor had been systematically administering harmful substances to her daughter, inducing real illness in a previously healthy child. Each hospital visit, each medical procedure, each test, all of it was unnecessary. All of it was caused by the mother herself. The realization was sickening. While doctors had been trying to save this child from mysterious illnesses, the child's own mother was the one making her sick. Every painful procedure the little girl endured, every needle stick, every medication, every moment of fear and confusion, all of it was orchestrated by Taylor. But why? What would possess a mother to poison her own child? Munchausen by proxy is a severe mental disorder, but it's also a crime. The perpetrator craves the attention, sympathy, and perceived heroism that comes from caring for a sick child. They enjoy the medical drama, the concerned looks from hospital staff, the sympathy from friends and family. They become addicted to being seen as the devoted parent of a suffering child. The victim, in this case, a helpless little girl, becomes a prop in their psychological theater. The child's actual pain, fear, and suffering don't register as real to the perpetrator. All that matters is the attention and sympathy the situation generates. Once hospital staff confirmed their suspicions, they immediately contacted law enforcement and child protective services. The child was removed from Taylor's custody and placed in protective care. Within days of separation from her mother, the child's mysterious symptoms began to resolve. Without access to her daughter, Taylor could no longer make her sick. Medical records painted a disturbing picture. Over months and possibly years, this child had been subjected to unnecessary medical interventions because of her mother's actions. She'd been poked, prodded, medicated, and hospitalized, all unnecessarily. All because her mother was poisoning her. Shauna D. Taylor was arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse and aggravated child abuse. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Medical testimony, hospital surveillance, toxicology reports, and the dramatic improvement in the child's health once separated from her mother all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Taylor had been systematically poisoning her daughter. The trial revealed the full extent of the abuse. Prosecutors presented evidence of Taylor's pattern of behavior, the medical records showing the child's repeated hospitalizations, and expert testimony about Munchausen by proxy syndrome. The defense attempted to argue that Taylor herself was sick, that she needed psychiatric help rather than prison. But the prosecution countered forcefully. Mental illness might explain behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. Taylor made conscious choices to harm her child. She obtained the substances she used to poison her daughter. She lied to medical professionals. She watched her child suffer and did nothing to stop it because she was the one causing the suffering. The jury found Shauna D. Taylor guilty on multiple counts. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison, followed by 15 years of probation. The judge emphasized that Taylor's actions had caused immeasurable physical and psychological harm to her daughter, and that the sentence needed to reflect the severity and duration of the abuse. As of today, Shauna Taylor remains incarcerated in a Florida prison. She won't be eligible for release until she's served her full sentence. Even when, and if, she's eventually released, she'll be under supervision for years afterward, and it's highly unlikely she'll ever regain custody or unsupervised contact with her daughter. The little girl at the center of this case is now in a safe, loving environment. Away from her mother, she's thriving. She's healthy. The mysterious illnesses that plagued her childhood have disappeared. She's getting the therapy and support she needs to process the trauma of what was done to her. But the scars, both physical and emotional, will last a lifetime. She'll grow up knowing that her mother poisoned her, that the person who should have protected her was the one harming her. That's a betrayal that cuts deeper than any physical wound. Munchausen by proxy cases are among the most disturbing in the child abuse spectrum because they involve such calculated, sustained deception. The abuse often goes on for extended periods because medical professionals are trained to trust parents and to assume that caregivers want what's best for their children. It requires a special kind of evil to exploit that trust, to use your child's body as a tool for your own psychological gratification. Shauna D. Taylor will have many years behind bars to reflect on what she did to her daughter. But no amount of time can undo the harm she caused to that innocent child. This case highlights why medical professionals must remain vigilant and why we must trust the experts when they suspect something isn't right. If you're finding value in these deep investigations, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Cold Case Time. We're dedicated to bringing you thoroughly researched true crime content. Case 4. Julie Powers Schenecker, the Tampa Bay tragedy. Our fourth case takes us to Tampa, Florida, in January 2011, to an upper-middle-class neighborhood where appearance meant everything and secrets festered behind perfect facades. Julie Powers Schenecker seemed to have it all. She was married to Parker Schenecker, a United States Army officer. They lived in a beautiful home in an affluent neighborhood. They had 2 children, Calix, aged 16, and Beau, aged 13. To the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect American family. But Julie was struggling. She had a history of mental illness and had been in and out of psychiatric treatment. She was prescribed multiple medications for depression and other conditions. Those who knew her well understood that beneath the surface, Julie was battling demons that most people couldn't see. On January 27, 2011, those demons won. That evening, Julie Powers Schenecker made a decision that would horrify a nation. She drove to a local gun shop and purchased a handgun. Florida's gun laws allowed her to complete the purchase without significant delay. She then drove to a nearby shooting range and practiced firing the weapon. She was preparing. What happened next is almost too painful to recount, but it must be told because these children deserve to be remembered, and this case must serve as a warning. Julie returned home and waited for her daughter Calix to finish soccer practice. When 16-year-old Calix got into the car, probably thinking about homework, friends, or whatever normal teenage concerns occupied her mind, her mother pulled out the gun and shot her in the head. Twice. The girl who should have been thinking about prom dresses and college applications died instantly in the family vehicle. Julie then drove home with her daughter's body in the car. She went inside the house, where her 13-year-old son Beau was doing homework at the computer. She walked up behind him and shot him in the head. He died at his desk. After murdering both of her children, Julie didn't flee. She didn't call for help. She didn't show any immediate remorse. She simply remained in the house with the bodies of her dead children. When Parker Schenecker returned home the following day, he'd been away on military duty, He walked into a scene of unimaginable horror. Both of his children were dead, killed by his wife. Julie was found on the back porch, covered in blood, incoherent. The 911 call from that day is chilling. Parker's voice, breaking with grief and shock, reporting that his wife had killed their children. The responding officers found Julie sitting calmly, showing little emotion or understanding of what she'd done. The investigation was straightforward in terms of evidence. Julie had purchased the gun. Ballistic evidence confirmed it was the murder weapon. She'd killed her children. There was no question about that. The question was, why? In the days and weeks that followed, a picture emerged of Julie's deteriorating mental state. She'd reportedly been angry with Calix for talking back and with Bo for being mouthy. In her disturbed mind, these normal teenage behaviors that countless parents deal with every single day, warranted execution. She later told investigators that she shot them because they were mouthy, and she was tired of it. The sheer disproportion between the perceived slight and the response defies comprehension. Teenagers talk back. They test boundaries. They can be difficult. But normal, healthy parents don't respond by murdering them. Julie Powers Schenecker was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The legal proceedings that followed were complex and protracted, centered largely around the question of her mental competency. The defense argued that Julie was severely mentally ill, that she'd been failed by the mental health system, that she wasn't in her right mind when she committed the murders. They presented extensive psychiatric evidence, medical records, and expert testimony about her mental state. The prosecution acknowledged that Julie had mental health issues, but argued forcefully that mental illness doesn't equal legal insanity. She'd planned the murders. She bought the gun. She practiced shooting it. She waited for opportunities to kill each child. These were deliberate, intentional acts. She knew what she was doing was wrong. She simply didn't care. The trial included heartbreaking testimony from family members, friends, and teachers who remembered Calix and Bo as bright, loving children with promising futures. Calix had been an excellent student and athlete. Bo had been curious, intelligent, full of potential. Both had been robbed of their futures by the person who gave them life. In May 2015, after years of legal proceedings and competency evaluations, Julie Powers Schenecker was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The jury rejected the insanity defense. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, Julie Schenecker is incarcerated in a Florida prison, where she'll spend the rest of her life. She'll never again walk as a free woman. She'll never know anything but confinement and consequence. But her life sentence pales in comparison to what she took from her children. Calix will never go to college, never get married, never have children of her own, never fulfill the potential that everyone saw in her. Bo will never become the man he was meant to be, never pursue his dreams, never experience the joys and challenges of adulthood. Parker Schenecker lost his entire family in one horrific act. He lost his children to murder and his wife to her own evil actions. One can only imagine the depth of that pain, the impossibility of moving forward from such devastating loss. This case raises difficult questions about mental illness, about when someone is too sick to be held accountable, about how we balance compassion for the mentally ill with justice for victims. The legal system concluded that Julie Powers Schenecker, despite her mental health struggles, made deliberate choices to murder her children and must be held accountable. Mental illness affects millions of people. The vast majority of people with mental illness never harm anyone. They struggle, they seek treatment, they manage their conditions. Julie Schenecker's mental illness may have contributed to her actions, but it doesn't excuse them. She had access to treatment, to medication, to support. She made choices that led to the deaths of 2 innocent children. Calix and Bo Schenecker deserved so much more than they got. They deserved to grow up, to chase their dreams, to live full lives. Instead, they got a mother who valued her anger more than their lives. If these stories are impacting you and you believe in the importance of remembering these victims, please show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to Cold Case Time. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people. Case 5. Joanne Zephir, the bleach poisoning nightmare. Our 5th case brings us to Broward County, Florida, in February 2022, and involves a form of abuse so cruel that it challenges our understanding of maternal instinct. Joanne Zephir was a mother of 3 children living in Lauderdale Lakes. To neighbors and casual observers, she appeared to be managing the challenges of single parenthood, caring for her kids, keeping the household running. But inside that home, something horrific was happening to her children. The case came to light when school officials at Crystal Lake Middle School noticed something alarming about one of Zephir's children. The child was experiencing severe health issues, unexplained illness, strange symptoms, visible distress. The school nurse and administrators became concerned enough to contact authorities. When Child Protective Services and law enforcement became involved, what they uncovered was nothing short of torture. Joanne Zephir had been systematically poisoning her children by forcing them to drink bleach. Let that sink in for a moment. Bleach, a caustic, toxic chemical that causes severe burns to tissue, that can cause permanent damage to internal organs, that can kill. This mother was forcing her children to ingest this poison. The investigation revealed that this wasn't a one-time incident of shocking abuse. This was repeated, systematic poisoning. Medical examinations of the children showed evidence of chemical burns in their mouths, throats, and digestive systems. The pain these children must have experienced is unimaginable. When confronted by investigators, the details that emerged were even more disturbing. Zephir had been using bleach ingestion as a form of punishment. When the children didn't behave according to her standards, she would force them to drink bleach. She knew it was harming them. She could see the pain it caused, but she continued to do it anyway. The children, interviewed carefully by specially trained investigators and child psychologists, described living in constant fear. They never knew when their mother might force them to drink the toxic substance. They lived with the physical pain of the chemical burns and the psychological trauma of knowing that the person who should protect them was the one hurting them. Medical experts who examined the children were appalled. The damage to their digestive systems was severe. They would require ongoing medical care and monitoring. Some of the damage might be permanent. Beyond the physical harm, the psychological trauma of this abuse would require years of therapy to address. Joanne Zephir was arrested and charged with multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. The charges reflected the severity of what she'd done, not just harming her children, but doing so in a calculated, repeated manner, using a substance she knew was toxic and dangerous. The case proceeded through the legal system with overwhelming evidence against her. Medical records documented the children's injuries. The children's own testimony was consistent and credible. Child abuse experts testified about the nature of the abuse and its effects. Zephir had no defense that could justify or explain what she'd done. The prosecution painted a picture of systematic torture. These children had been subjected to one of the most painful forms of abuse imaginable, and it had been inflicted by their own mother, in their own home, the place where they should have been safest. In October 2022, Joanne Zephir pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated child abuse. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for each count, to be served concurrently, meaning the sentences would run at the same time rather than one after another. Many observers felt the sentence was too lenient given the severity and duration of the abuse. However, what many people don't realize is that even after Zephir completes her prison sentence, she faces additional consequences. She will never regain custody of her children. Her parental rights have been permanently terminated. She'll be required to register as a child abuser. She'll face restrictions on where she can live and work. The consequences of her actions will follow her for the rest of her life. As of today, Joanne Zephir remains incarcerated in a Florida prison. When she's eventually released, she'll emerge into a world where her children have hopefully healed, moved on, and built lives far away from her reach. The 3 children at the center of this case have been placed in safe, loving environments away from their mother. They're receiving medical care for their physical injuries and therapy for the psychological trauma. Reports indicate that, removed from the abusive environment, they're beginning to heal. But healing from this kind of trauma is a long journey. These children will carry the scars, both visible and invisible, of what their mother did to them. They'll have to process the betrayal of knowing that the person who should have loved and protected them instead poisoned them. The bleach poisoning case raises questions about how such abuse can continue undetected. The children were in school, seen by teachers and administrators regularly. Yet the abuse continued for an extended period before it was discovered. This case underscores the importance of vigilance by teachers, healthcare providers, and community members. Children suffering abuse often can't or won't speak up. Adults in their lives must notice the signs and take action. Joanne Zephir's actions remind us that abuse can take forms we might not immediately recognize. We think of abuse as physical beating or neglect, but chemical poisoning is equally devastating and perhaps even more insidious because the harm is internal, harder to see, harder to prove. These 3 children deserved a mother who would nurture them, not poison them. They deserved safety, love, and protection. Instead, they got pain, fear, and trauma that will take years to overcome. If you believe it's important to share these stories and hold abusers accountable, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Your support helps us continue investigating these critical cases. Case 6. Tinessa Hogan, the Canal Murders. Our 6th case takes us to Jacksonville, Florida, in November 2021, to a tragedy that shocked the community and revealed a mother's unthinkable betrayal. Tinessa Hogan was a mother of 4 children living on Jacksonville's west side. On November 18, 2021, a day that should have been ordinary, Hogan loaded her 4 children into her car. Royalty, aged 9, Deshawn, aged 7 or 8, and 2 younger children whose names have been kept private due to their ages. What happened next depends on whose account you believe, but the facts are undisputed. By the end of that day, 2 of Hogan's children were dead, pulled from a canal where they drowned. According to Hogan's initial account to police, she was driving with her children when her car broke down near McGirt's Creek, a waterway in Jacksonville. She claimed that 2 of her children, Royalty and Deshawn, got out of the car and wandered toward the water. She said she tried to stop them, but they went into the canal and drowned before she could save them. First responders rushed to the scene. Dive teams recovered the bodies of 9-year-old Royalty and young Deshawn from the water. Despite efforts to revive them, both children were pronounced dead. Initially, it appeared to be a tragic accident, a mother's worst nightmare. A broken-down car, children who wandered too close to water, a split-second tragedy that ended 2 young lives. The community rallied around Hogan, offering sympathy and support for what seemed to be an unimaginable loss. But investigators weren't convinced. Something about Hogan's story didn't add up. The timeline was problematic. The location of where the children allegedly entered the water didn't match where their bodies were found. Hogan's behavior and emotional responses raised red flags for experienced detectives. Her account of events kept shifting, with details changing in subsequent interviews. As investigators dug deeper, witness statements began to contradict Hogan's version of events. People who had been in the area around the time of the drownings reported seeing things that didn't match Hogan's claims. The forensic evidence from the scene raised more questions than it answered. Then came the breakthrough. Hogan's 2 surviving children, who had been in the car that day, provided accounts that were dramatically different from their mother's story. According to the surviving children's testimony, this wasn't an accident at all. They told investigators that their mother had deliberately driven to the canal. They said she took Royalty and Deshawn to the water's edge and either pushed them in or forced them into the water. The children reported that their mother didn't try to save their siblings, she let them drown. The children's accounts were detailed, consistent, and deeply disturbing. These weren't the confused recollections of traumatized kids misremembering events. These were clear, specific descriptions of what they'd witnessed their mother do. Investigators also discovered troubling information about Hogan's circumstances leading up to the drownings. There were indications of extreme stress, financial problems, and potential mental health issues. But none of these factors, even in combination, could justify or excuse what she allegedly did. Tinessa Hogan was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The charges reflected the prosecution's belief that these weren't accidental drownings, they were deliberate killings. The case against Hogan was built on multiple pillars of evidence. The inconsistencies in her own statements, the testimony of her surviving children, witness accounts from people in the area, forensic evidence from the scene, and the implausibility of her accident narrative. The defense faced an uphill battle. How do you defend against charges when the alleged victim's own siblings say they watched their mother kill them? The defense strategy focused on challenging the reliability of child witnesses and suggesting that Hogan's mental state at the time rendered her unable to form the intent necessary for first-degree murder. But the prosecution countered that driving to a specific location, taking the children to the water's edge, and allowing them to drown required planning and deliberation. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a mental break. It was murder. The trial included heartbreaking testimony about Royalty and Deshawn. Teachers described them as sweet, loving children. Family members shared memories of their smiles, their laughter, their potential. These were real children with real lives, real dreams, real futures that were stolen from them. The jury heard the surviving children's testimony, a particularly difficult aspect of the trial. These children had to relive the trauma of watching their siblings die and to testify against their own mother in open court. In the end, the jury found Tinessa Hogan guilty on both counts of first-degree murder. The evidence was simply too overwhelming to conclude anything other than that she had deliberately killed her children. Tinessa Hogan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in handing down the sentence, noted the particular cruelty of drowning, a terrifying, painful way to die, and the betrayal of a mother killing her own children. Today, Tinessa Hogan sits in a Florida prison where she will remain for the rest of her natural life. She'll never again walk free. She'll never again have contact with her surviving children, who have been placed in protective custody far from her reach. 9-year-old Royalty and young Deshawn should still be alive. Royalty should be a teenager now, discovering who she is, making friends, learning, and growing. Deshawn should be playing sports, going to school, experiencing all the joys of childhood. Instead, their lives were cut brutally short by the one person who should have protected them above all else. The surviving children face a lifetime of trauma. They witnessed their siblings' deaths at their mother's hands. They had to testify in court against the woman who gave them life. They'll grow up knowing what their mother did, carrying that knowledge and that loss for the rest of their lives. The Canal murders case reminds us that family annihilation, when a parent kills their own children, often stems from a toxic combination of desperation, mental illness, and selfishness. In many such cases, the parent sees the children as extensions of themselves rather than as separate human beings with their own right to life. Tinessa Hogan will have decades behind bars to reflect on what she did that November day in 2021. But no amount of time can bring back Royalty and Deshawn. No amount of remorse can undo the trauma inflicted on the surviving children. The damage is permanent, the loss irreversible. These children deserved so much better than what they got. If their story moves you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to Cold Case Time. We're committed to giving victims a voice. Case 7. Patricia Ripley, the drowning of Alejandro. Our 7th case takes us to Miami-Dade County in May 2020, during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when a mother's unthinkable act shocked a community already reeling from crisis. Patricia Ripley was the mother of Alejandro Ripley, a 9-year-old boy with autism. Alejandro was nonverbal, meaning he couldn't communicate through speech, but by all accounts, he was a sweet, loving child who brought joy to those around him. His teachers at school adored him. Therapists who worked with him spoke of his gentle nature and his progress in learning to communicate through other means. Caring for a child with special needs can be challenging. It requires patience, resources, support, and above all, unwavering love. Patricia Ripley presented herself to the world as a devoted mother doing her best for her special needs son. But behind that facade, something dark was brewing. On May 21, 2020, Patricia Ripley called 911 in a panic. She reported that she and her son had been victims of a carjacking. According to her initial story, 2 black men in a dark sedan had attacked them, demanded drugs and money, and when she said she had none, they'd taken her son and driven off with him. The story was alarming and specific. Law enforcement immediately launched a massive search for Alejandro. In the midst of a pandemic, with resources already stretched thin, officers mobilized to find this missing autistic child. The community rallied, sharing information on social media, organizing search parties, praying for Alejandro's safe return. But even as the search was underway, investigators noticed inconsistencies in Patricia's story. Her account of events kept changing. Details that should have been clear, what the alleged attackers looked like, exactly where the carjacking occurred, the sequence of events kept shifting. Then came the devastating discovery. Hours after Patricia's 911 call, Alejandro's body was found in a canal. The 9-year-old had drowned. His body showed no signs of trauma from an attack or kidnapping. The evidence suggested he'd simply been placed in the water and left to drown. The carjacking story began to completely unravel. Investigators obtained surveillance footage from the area where Patricia claimed the attack occurred. The footage told a very different story than the one Patricia had reported. The video showed Patricia driving her car with Alejandro inside. She drove to a canal, stopped the car, and led her son to the water's edge. What happened next is captured on camera and is absolutely heartbreaking. Patricia pushed Alejandro into the water. But here's where the story becomes even more horrific. A bystander who happened to be nearby saw what was happening and rescued Alejandro from the water. This Good Samaritan pulled the boy out, likely saving his life in that moment. Patricia took Alejandro back. And then, about an hour later, she drove to a different canal and did it again. This time, she made sure there was no one around to save him. She pushed her nonverbal, autistic 9-year-old son into the water and left him there to drown. Alejandro, who couldn't call for help, who couldn't swim to safety, who trusted his mother completely, died alone and terrified in that dark water. After killing her son, Patricia concocted the carjacking story to cover her tracks. She called 911 and gave a detailed, false report, knowing her son's body was already in the water. She looked investigators in the eye and lied about what she'd done to Alejandro. She even went so far as to describe her fictional attackers with specific details designed to point blame away from herself. But the surveillance footage, combined with the testimony of the man who'd rescued Alejandro the first time, made the truth undeniable. There was no carjacking. There were no attackers. There was only a mother who had decided to murder her autistic son. The investigation uncovered Patricia's possible motive. She'd told friends and family that caring for Alejandro was becoming too difficult, that she was overwhelmed. There were indications she'd been researching her son's life insurance policy in the days before his death. Some evidence suggested she saw Alejandro as a burden she wanted to be free of. Patricia Ripley was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The community that had rallied to search for Alejandro, that had prayed for his safe return, was devastated to learn that his own mother had killed him. The case generated national attention, partly because of the audacity of the false carjacking report and Patricia's willingness to fuel racial tensions by falsely accusing black men of a crime she herself had committed. Her lies could have led to innocent people being wrongly accused or even harmed. At trial, the evidence against Patricia was overwhelming. The surveillance footage showed exactly what she'd done. The timeline of events was clear. Her shifting stories and lies were documented. There was no credible defense. The prosecution painted a picture of premeditation. Patricia didn't kill Alejandro in a moment of rage or crisis. She drove him to a specific location. When her first attempt was thwarted by a rescuer, she tried again at a different location. This was calculated, deliberate murder. The defense attempted to argue that Patricia was suffering from mental health issues, that she'd been overwhelmed and desperate. But the prosecution countered that being overwhelmed doesn't justify drowning your child. Millions of parents feel overwhelmed. They don't murder their children. There were resources available to Patricia if she truly needed help. She could have sought respite care, could have asked family for assistance, could have accessed support services for families of children with special needs. Instead, she chose murder. She chose to end her son's life rather than seek help. And then she lied about it, trying to escape accountability for what she'd done. In March 2023, Patricia Ripley pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will never walk free again. Today, Patricia Ripley sits in a Florida prison, where she'll remain for the rest of her life. But her punishment, severe as it is, pales in comparison to what she took from Alejandro. Alejandro Ripley was only 9 years old. Yes, he had autism. Yes, he was nonverbal. But he was a human being with thoughts, feelings, likes, and dislikes. He had favorite foods, favorite activities, people he loved. He experienced joy and fear and everything in between. He deserved to live, to grow, to experience life to the fullest extent his abilities allowed. Instead, he experienced terror and betrayal in his final moments. The person he trusted most in the world, His mother, his protector, led him to water and left him there to die. For a child who couldn't call for help, couldn't understand what was happening, the fear must have been overwhelming. The autism community was particularly outraged by this case. Children with special needs are already vulnerable. They rely on their caregivers completely. When that caregiver becomes the threat, these children have no defense, no ability to advocate for themselves, no way to escape. Patricia Ripley's actions sent a chilling message that some parents see their special needs children as burdens to be eliminated rather than as human beings to be cherished and protected. The case sparked important conversations about the support systems available to families of children with special needs and the urgent need for better resources and intervention. Alejandro deserved so much more. He deserved a mother who would fight for him, advocate for him, love him unconditionally. Instead, he got a mother who saw him as disposable. If Alejandro's story touched your heart and you want to see more cases where justice is served, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Your support matters. Case 8. Odette Josent, strangling her children. Our 8th case takes us to Dania Beach, Florida, in September 2022, to a tragedy that unfolded in a quiet residential neighborhood. Odette Josent was a mother of 3 young children. To neighbors, the family seemed normal enough, a mother caring for her kids, managing the daily routines of family life. But on September 20th, 2022, something catastrophic happened inside that home. Emergency responders received a call that sent them rushing to Josent's residence. When they arrived, they found a scene of horror. Josent's 3 young children were unresponsive. Despite desperate attempts to revive them, all 3 children were pronounced dead. The initial investigation immediately focused on the cause of death. How had 3 children in the same household died at the same time? Was it carbon monoxide poisoning? Some environmental toxin? A gas leak? Investigators searched for any explanation that might make sense of such a tragedy. But the medical examiner's findings pointed to a much darker truth. The children had been strangled. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't an environmental disaster. This was homicide. All 3 children bore the marks of strangulation. The medical evidence was clear. Someone had used physical force to compress their airways until they stopped breathing. For each child, it would have taken sustained pressure for minutes to cause death. This wasn't instantaneous. It was prolonged, deliberate killing. The investigation turned immediately to Odette Josent. She was the only adult in the home when the children died. She'd been the one to call 911. And when questioned by investigators, her account of what happened was inconsistent and evasive. Under questioning, Josent's story began to fall apart. Eventually, faced with the overwhelming physical evidence, she confessed. She admitted to strangling her 3 young children to death. But why? What could possibly drive a mother to systematically strangle each of her children? Investigators discovered that Josent had been experiencing severe mental health issues. She'd been struggling with what appeared to be psychosis, experiencing delusions and disordered thinking. In her disturbed mental state, she'd come to believe that her children were in danger, not from any external threat, but from demons or evil forces she believed were targeting them. In her twisted logic, she decided that the only way to protect her children was to kill them herself. She believed she was saving them from something worse. So, one by one, she strangled her own children, watching the life leave their bodies, believing in her delusional state that she was doing the right thing. The children's ages made the crime even more heartbreaking. These were young kids, completely dependent on their mother for care and protection. They trusted her absolutely, and she betrayed that trust in the most final, irreversible way possible. Odette Josent was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The case presented the legal system with difficult questions about culpability and mental illness. Unlike some of our previous cases where mental illness was claimed but questionable, Josent appeared to have been genuinely psychotic at the time she killed her children. The defense argued that Josent lacked the mental capacity to understand that what she was doing was wrong. They presented psychiatric evidence that she'd been experiencing a complete break from reality, that she genuinely believed she was protecting her children rather than killing them. The prosecution didn't dispute that Josent was mentally ill, but they argued she was still legally responsible for her actions. Mental illness, they contended, doesn't automatically equal legal insanity. The question wasn't whether she was sick, it was whether she understood, at some level, that strangling her children would kill them. The case highlighted the gaps in our mental health system. Warning signs of Jocelyn's deteriorating mental state had apparently been present before the murders. Had she received proper psychiatric intervention, might these deaths have been prevented? It's an agonizing question with no satisfying answer. The legal proceedings included extensive psychiatric evaluation. Jocelyn was assessed by multiple experts to determine her mental state at the time of the killings and her current competency to stand trial. Ultimately, Odette Jocelyn was found guilty but mentally ill. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence reflected both the severity of her crimes and the recognition that she posed an ongoing danger to society. Today, Jocelyn is incarcerated in a Florida prison, where she receives psychiatric treatment for her mental illness. She'll spend the rest of her life behind bars, never again to walk free, never again to have the opportunity to harm another child. The 3 children at the center of this tragedy had their lives stolen from them before they'd barely begun. They should be in school now, making friends, playing, learning, growing. Instead, they're gone, killed by the person who should have protected them above all others. This case raises profound questions about mental illness and criminal responsibility. How do we balance compassion for those suffering from severe mental illness with justice for their victims? When someone commits an unspeakable crime while genuinely delusional, how do we respond? The legal system's answer in Jocelyn's case was that she must be held accountable, but with recognition of her mental illness. She's imprisoned, but she's also receiving treatment. She'll never be free, but her mental health needs are being addressed. Some might argue that someone in Jocelyn's mental state deserves sympathy rather than punishment. Others counter that regardless of her mental state, 3 innocent children are dead by her hand, and that demands accountability. What's not debatable is that 3 young lives were lost unnecessarily. Mental health resources exist. Crisis intervention services are available. If Jocelyn's deteriorating mental state had been recognized and addressed earlier, these children might still be alive. The case also highlights the vulnerability of children in households where a parent is experiencing severe mental illness. Children can't advocate for themselves. They can't recognize that their parents' behavior is dangerous. They're completely at the mercy of the adults around them. Odette Jocelyn's 3 children deserved a chance at life. They deserved safety, love, and protection. Instead, they got a mother whose mind was so fractured by illness that she killed them believing she was saving them. If you believe these stories need to be told, please support our work by liking this video and subscribing to Cold Case Time. We're dedicated to thorough, respectful coverage of these important cases. Case 9. Jessica Lacey McCarty, triple filicide in Palm Bay. Our 9th case takes us to Palm Bay, Florida, in May 2015, to one of the most disturbing multiple child murder cases in recent Florida history. Jessica Lacey McCarty was a mother of 3 young children: Lacey, aged 6, Philip, aged 5, and Christopher, aged 6 months. She lived with her children in what appeared from the outside to be a typical single-mother household. Neighbors saw her coming and going with the kids, managing the usual chaos of parenting multiple young children. But inside that home, Jessica was hiding dark secrets and darker intentions. On May 13, 2015, law enforcement received a call that would lead them to a scene of unimaginable horror. When officers arrived at McCarty's residence, they found her 3 young children dead. All 3 had been murdered. The crime scene was devastating. 6-year-old Lacey and 5-year-old Philip had been strangled to death. 6-month-old baby Christopher had been smothered. These children had died terrified and in pain at the hands of their own mother. Jessica McCarty initially tried to claim that an intruder had broken into their home and killed the children while she was helpless to stop it. But investigators immediately recognized the inconsistencies in her story. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing in the home suggested a struggle with an intruder. The physical evidence didn't support her narrative. Under questioning, McCarty's story changed multiple times. Each version contained different details, different timelines, different explanations for what had happened. Investigators recognized the pattern: someone trying to construct a story to cover their own guilt, but unable to keep the lie straight. The medical examiner's findings were definitive. The children had been killed through close, personal violence, strangulation, and smothering. These weren't deaths caused by a weapon wielded from a distance. These were intimate murders, requiring the killer to be face-to-face with the victims, to watch them die, to continue applying pressure even as they struggled. For strangulation and smothering to cause death in children takes several minutes of sustained pressure. The killer has to commit to the act, has to ignore the victim's struggles, has to override every natural instinct to stop. With 3 children, McCarty had to do this 3 separate times. After killing one child, she moved on to the next, and then the next. As the investigation progressed, a picture of McCarty's life and mindset began to emerge. She'd been facing significant life stressors, financial problems, relationship issues, the overwhelming demands of caring for 3 young children as a single mother. Friends and family members reported that she'd seemed increasingly stressed and withdrawn in the weeks before the murders. But millions of people face financial stress and parenting challenges. They don't respond by murdering their children. What made McCarty different? What pushed her over the line from stressed parent to child killer? Investigators discovered that McCarty had been researching ways to kill children in the days before the murders. Her internet search history revealed queries about methods of murder, how to make deaths look accidental, and how to avoid getting caught. This wasn't a spontaneous act of desperation. It was premeditated murder. Jessica McCarty was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming. The physical evidence from the scene, the medical examiner's findings, the inconsistencies in her own statements, and the damning internet search history. The prosecution built a case around premeditation. McCarty had planned these murders. She'd researched how to do it. She'd waited until she had the children alone. And then she systematically killed each of her 3 children, one after another. The defense attempted to argue that McCarty had been suffering from severe postpartum depression and psychosis. They presented evidence that she'd been struggling with mental health issues following Christopher's birth. They suggested that she'd experienced a mental break that rendered her unable to understand her actions. But the prosecution countered forcefully. The internet searches proved she knew exactly what she was doing and that it was wrong. Otherwise, why research how to avoid getting caught? The premeditation demonstrated clear thinking and planning. This wasn't a woman in the grip of uncontrollable psychosis. This was a woman who made calculated decisions to murder her children. The trial included testimony about the children, who they were, what they'd been like, the futures they should have had. Teachers described Lacey and Philip as sweet, bright children who loved school and playing with friends. Family members shared photos and videos of the baby, Christopher, smiling and starting to discover the world around him. The courtroom had to confront the reality of what had been lost. 3 children, all under the age of 7, all with their entire lives ahead of them, all murdered by the person who should have protected them most. In September 2017, after a trial that laid bare the horrific details of what McCarty had done, the jury found her guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The evidence was simply too overwhelming for any other verdict. Jessica Lacey McCarty was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge specified that the sentences should run consecutively, meaning one after another rather than at the same time, to emphasize that McCarty had committed 3 separate murders, each deserving its own punishment. Today, Jessica McCarty sits in a Florida prison where she will remain for the rest of her natural life. She will never walk free. She will never know anything but the inside of prison walls. She will grow old and die in custody, never again experiencing the life she took from her children. Lacey would be a teenager now if she'd lived, navigating middle school, making friends, discovering her interests and talents. Philip would be right behind her, probably starting to think about what he wanted to be when he grew up. Christopher would be a young boy, running and playing, full of energy and curiosity. Instead, all 3 were robbed of their futures by the person who gave them life. The betrayal is almost incomprehensible. The triple Filicide in Palm Bay stands as one of the most tragic cases in Florida history. 3 innocent lives, snuffed out before they'd barely begun. A mother who chose murder over seeking help, who chose violence over reaching out to family, friends, or social services for support. The case sparked conversations about the resources available to struggling parents, about postpartum mental health, about the warning signs of someone who might harm their children. But those conversations, important as they are, can't bring back Lacey, Philip, and Christopher. These 3 children deserved so much more than they got. They deserved a mother who would love them, protect them, and help them grow into the people they were meant to be. Instead, they got a mother who saw them as problems to be eliminated. If these children's stories have moved you and you believe in the importance of seeking justice for the most vulnerable victims, please show your support by hitting the like button and subscribing to Cold Case Time. Your engagement helps us continue this vital work. Case 10. Esther Thielus, Setting Children on Fire. Our final case brings us to the most recent tragedy on our list, occurring in Deerfield Beach, Florida, in May 2024. Esther Thielus was the mother of 2 young children, a son and a daughter, both under the age of 10. She lived in a residential neighborhood where families raised children, went to work, and lived ordinary lives. No one could have imagined the horror that was about to unfold. On May 11, 2024, emergency responders received a frantic call reporting a fire at Thielus's residence. When firefighters arrived, they found a scene of chaos and tragedy. The home was ablaze, and inside were Thielus's 2 young children. Firefighters worked heroically to rescue the children from the burning home. Both children were found and rushed to the hospital with severe burns covering significant portions of their bodies. The medical team fought desperately to save them, but the injuries were too severe. Tragically, both children died from their burns and smoke inhalation. Initially, the fire appeared to be a devastating accident, a house fire that claimed 2 young lives while their mother was unable to save them. The community mourned what seemed to be an unspeakable tragedy. But as fire investigators examined the scene, evidence emerged that this was no accident. The burn patterns, the point of origin, and other forensic evidence indicated that the fire had been intentionally set. This wasn't a house fire, it was arson. The investigation took a dark turn. Detectives discovered that Esther Thielus had deliberately set her home on fire with her children inside. According to the evidence, she'd used an accelerant to ensure the fire would spread quickly and burn intensely. But the horror went even deeper than arson. Witness statements and physical evidence suggested that Thielus had not only set the fire, but had actively prevented her children from escaping. She'd reportedly locked them in a room before starting the blaze, ensuring they couldn't get out. The children, trapped in their burning home, had died in one of the most painful and terrifying ways imaginable. Burning to death involves excruciating pain as the flames consume skin and tissue. The smoke and heat make each breath agony. The terror of being trapped with no escape is unimaginable. And these children experienced all of this knowing their mother was the one who'd done it to them. Investigators worked to understand what could have motivated such an unthinkable act. They discovered that Thielus had been experiencing severe personal and financial difficulties. There were indications of mental health struggles. Some evidence suggested she'd become convinced that she and her children would be better off dead than facing their current circumstances. This is a phenomenon sometimes called altruistic filicide, when a parent kills their children because they believe, in their distorted thinking, that death is preferable to continued life. The parent sees themselves as saving the children from suffering, poverty, or some other perceived threat. But there's nothing altruistic about burning your children alive. There's no mercy in locking them in a room and setting it on fire. Whatever Thielus's mental state, what she did to her children was torture and murder. Esther Thielus was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of aggravated child abuse, and arson. The charges reflected the severity of what she'd done, not just killing her children, but doing so in an exceptionally cruel manner. The case is currently working its way through the legal system as of this recording. Thielus has pleaded not guilty, and her defense team is expected to argue that she was suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the murders. Psychiatric evaluations are ongoing to determine her mental competency to stand trial. The prosecution is preparing a case built on the physical evidence from the fire scene, witness testimony, and Thielus's own statements to investigators. They'll argue that regardless of her mental state, she made deliberate choices to obtain accelerant, to start the fire, to trap her children inside, and to ensure they couldn't escape. The community in Deerfield Beach has been devastated by this tragedy. The children were known in their neighborhood and at their school. Teachers remember them as bright, loving kids who should have had full lives ahead of them. Neighbors recall seeing them playing outside, riding bikes, being normal, happy children. Now those children are gone, killed in one of the most horrible ways possible, burned alive by their own mother. If Esther Thelis is convicted, she faces life in prison without the possibility of parole, the same sentence handed down to the other 9 mothers we've discussed in this documentary. She would join them behind bars, spending the rest of her days paying for what she did to her children. The trial, when it occurs, will force the community to relive the horror of what happened. Witnesses will have to testify about what they saw and heard. Medical examiners will have to describe the children's injuries. Firefighters will have to recall the scene they encountered. And throughout it all, the question will hang in the air. How could a mother do this to her own children? As this case moves forward, we'll learn more about Thelis's mental state, her motivations, and the exact sequence of events that led to her children's deaths. But no amount of explanation can make what she did understandable or acceptable. 2 more children added to the devastating toll of maternal filicide in Florida. 2 more young lives stolen by the person who should have protected them. 2 more futures erased in an act of unthinkable violence. These children deserved safety, love, and the chance to grow up. They deserved birthday parties and graduations and all the milestones of a full life. Instead, they got flames and smoke and terror and death. If you've watched this far and believe these stories need to be told, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Sharing these cases helps ensure these children are never forgotten. We've journeyed through 10 of the darkest cases in Florida's criminal history. 10 mothers, 22 innocent children, 22 lives stolen by the very people who gave them life. Ana Maria Cardona, who tortured and killed 3-year-old Lazaro and threw his body in a dog food cooler. Amanda Lewis, who drowned 7-year-old Adrianna in the family pool while her brother watched. Shauna D. Taylor, who poisoned her daughter systematically, feeding on the attention and sympathy. Julie Powers Schenecker, who shot both her teenagers because they were mouthy. Joanne Zephir, who forced her children to drink bleach as punishment. Tinessa Hogan, who allegedly drowned 2 of her 4 children in a Jacksonville canal. Patricia Ripley, who pushed her autistic son into the water not once but twice, making sure he drowned the 2nd time. Odette Josent, who strangled all 3 of her young children. Jessica McCarty, who killed her 3 children one by one in their Palm Bay home. And Esther Thelis, who set her children on fire in their own home. 10 women who will never see freedom again. 10 women spending life behind bars, paying for crimes so heinous that society has determined they can never be allowed to walk free. But this documentary isn't really about them. It's about the children. It's about Lazaro and Adrianna and Calix and Bo and Alejandro and all the others whose names we've spoken today. Children who deserved so much more than they got. Children who should be alive today, living their lives, chasing their dreams. These cases force us to confront uncomfortable truths. That evil can hide behind a mother's smile. That the most dangerous place for some children is their own home with their own parent. That we, as a society, must remain vigilant and willing to intervene when we suspect a child is in danger. Every single one of these children showed signs of abuse before their deaths. Teachers noticed. Neighbors noticed. Family members noticed. But in many cases, those signs weren't reported or weren't acted upon quickly enough. We must do better. We must be willing to make that difficult phone call, to report our suspicions, to advocate for children who cannot advocate for themselves. These mothers claimed various justifications for their actions: mental illness, overwhelming stress, financial pressure, believing they were protecting their children from worse fates. But millions of people experience mental illness, stress, and financial hardship. The vast majority never harm their children. These weren't inevitable tragedies. These were choices. Choices to harm instead of seek help. Choices to kill instead of call a family member, a friend, a hotline, a social worker. Choices to end lives instead of asking for support. These women chose violence, chose murder, chose to betray the most sacred trust that exists. And now they'll spend the rest of their lives behind bars, which is exactly where they belong. But we must also remember that even life in prison doesn't equal the sentences these women handed their children. They took everything from them, not just their lives, but their futures, their potential, their dreams, their joy. They stole years and decades of life that can never be returned. As we close this documentary, let's take a moment to remember all 22 children. Lazaro Figueroa, Adrianna Hutto, the daughter poisoned by Shauna Taylor, Calix and Bo Schenecker, the 3 children forced to drink bleach by Joanne Zephir, Royalty and Deshawn, drowned in the Jacksonville Canal, Alejandro Ripley, the 3 children strangled by Odette Josent, Lacey, Philip, and Christopher McCarty, and the 2 children set on fire by Esther Thelis. Say their names. Remember them. Let their memories remind us why we must protect children, why we must speak up when we suspect abuse, why we must support families who are struggling before desperation turns to violence. These 10 Florida mothers will never see freedom again, and rightly so. But more importantly, their victims will never be forgotten. Their stories will continue to be told, their memories preserved, their lives, though far too short, honored and remembered. This has been Cold Case Time, bringing you the true stories that must be told, honoring the victims who deserve to be remembered, and examining the justice that must be served. If you made it to the end of this documentary, you're clearly invested in true crime content that goes deep and treats victims with the respect they deserve. 99% of you watching still haven't subscribed. Please hit that subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and help us continue bringing you thoroughly researched cases like this one. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on these cases, and let me know what cases you'd like to see covered next. Your likes, comments, and shares help the algorithm show this content to more people who care about justice for victims. Thank you for watching, and remember, if you suspect a child is being abused, speak up. Make the call. You might save a life. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never forget the victims.